The desert stretched endlessly, a rolling ocean of golden dunes that shimmered and twisted under the oppressive glare of twin suns. It was a landscape that demanded solitude, swallowing sounds and secrets alike into its arid embrace. For Dr. Elias Carter, the silence was both a balm and a challenge. He stood at the edge of a rocky outcrop, his boots sinking slightly into the heated sand, scanning the undulating horizon through polarized lenses. A storm had passed through this region 2 nights before, scattering debris and exposing layers of the desert's hidden past. It was why he had come, why he always came to places like this. The desert had a habit of giving up secrets when the winds were just right, but this time it wasn't shards of ancient pottery or fossilized remains that caught his attention. It was the light. A faint, pulsing glow emanated from the base of a nearby dune, so subtle it could have been a trick of his sun-weary mind, but the glow persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, unlike the erratic dance of mirages. Intrigued, Elias descended cautiously, the soft crunch of his boots the only sound accompanying his movements. The air grew heavier as he approached, thick with a tension that made him pause. A geologist by training and an explorer by necessity, Elias had learned to trust his instincts, and they screamed at him now. Something was wrong. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, casting fleeting shadows across the sand. He crouched low, brushing aside the grains with gloved hands. What he uncovered was not of this earth. It was a figure, half-buried and limp, its form startlingly alien yet disturbingly fragile. Silvery skin, textured like liquid metal, shimmered faintly under his touch. Bioluminescent markings lined its body in intricate, faintly glowing patterns, though they flickered erratically, as if struggling against an unseen force. Elias froze, his breath caught somewhere between astonishment and dread. He reached for his scanner, a sleek device hanging at his hip, and waved it over the figure. The readings were incomprehensible, fluctuating life signs, anomalous energy levels, and a composition that defied anything in his database. This wasn't one of the artifacts humanity had carefully cataloged from its tentative interactions with alien species. This was something else, something unknown. Who or what are you? Elias murmured, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness around them. The figure stirred weakly at the sound, its chest rising in a shallow, labored breath. Eyes fluttered open, large, dark, and impossibly deep, as if they held entire galaxies within them. The gaze fixed on him, and for a fleeting moment he felt as though he were being evaluated, weighed, and measured. Then it spoke, or tried to. The sound was a rasp, guttural and alien, its tone laced with a desperation that transcended language. Elias didn't understand the words, but their meaning was unmistakable. "Help me." Against his better judgment, Elias acted. He wasn't equipped for this, not in the middle of an uncharted desert, alone and miles from any semblance of civilization. But leaving her here, to the mercy of the relentless sun and the scavengers of the night, wasn't an option. He lifted the figure carefully, surprised at how light she was, and carried her back toward his camp. Each step sank into the soft dunes, the weight of his decision pressing down heavier than the figure in his arms. Back at the camp, the temperature had begun its nightly plunge, the sweltering heat replaced by an almost unearthly chill. Elias laid the alien girl on a makeshift cot inside his tent, dimming the lights to keep from startling her further. She had fallen unconscious during the journey, her glowing patterns now flickering weakly, almost like a fading heartbeat. The storm had left his camp battered, but the essentials remained intact. He retrieved a canteen and held it to her lips, hoping the universal necessity of water would translate. To his relief, she sipped, though the act seemed to drain what little energy she had left. As the hours passed, Elias found himself watching her more than working, the mystery of her presence gnawing at him. Who was she? How had she come to be buried in the desert? And why did every instinct in his body tell him that helping her was the beginning of something much larger than himself? Outside, the desert stretched out under a canopy of stars, vast and unknowable. But inside the small confines of his tent, another kind of vastness pressed down on Elias. A silence filled with questions, uncertainties, and a growing sense of unease. He was jolted from his thoughts by a sound, a soft, keening noise that seemed to come from the alien girl. Her bioluminescent patterns flared briefly, casting the tent in a ghostly light. It was as if her body was responding to something, an unseen signal or a distant presence. Then she spoke again, a single word that sent a shiver through him despite the chill already in the air. Sarvik. Elias didn't know what it meant, but the weight of the word lingered, heavy and foreboding. It wasn't a name he recognized, but it carried the tone of warning, of danger drawing closer with every passing second. As the first light of dawn began to seep into the horizon, Elias realized one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever he had stumbled upon in the sands, it was only the beginning. The morning sun clawed its way over the horizon, its harsh light creeping through the seams of the tent and rousing Dr. Elias Carter from a restless sleep. Outside, the desert hummed with the quiet energy of dawn, winds whispering over dunes, faint chirps of hardy insects breaking the silence. Inside the tent, however, the air felt oppressively still, charged with the weight of an unanswered mystery. Elias glanced at his unexpected guest. She lay motionless on the cot, her silvered skin now faintly reflective in the dim light, bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly across her body. The rhythm of the glow had slowed, becoming irregular like the faltering beat of a dying star. He crouched beside her, torn between his scientific instincts and a deepening sense of responsibility. Her presence was impossible to explain, an anomaly even in an age where humanity had begun to brush against the fringes of alien contact. Yet she was here, a puzzle buried beneath layers of questions. "Who are you?" he murmured, though he didn't expect an answer. Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice. Slowly they opened, revealing those unnervingly vast eyes. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable, but sharp with awareness. Then, as if testing the limits of her strength, she shifted, propping herself weakly on one elbow. "You speak?" she rasped, her voice cracked, but laced with an undeniable intelligence. The sound startled Elias. It wasn't perfect English, but the words were unmistakable. "I do," he replied, keeping his tone calm, though his pulse quickened. "Can you understand me?" She nodded faintly, though the effort seemed to drain her. "Enough. To listen." Elias exhaled, relief mingling with a fresh wave of questions. "I found you in the desert," he began, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Buried. Dying. Do you remember how you got there?" Her gaze flickered, and for a long moment she didn't respond. When she did, her words came haltingly, as if she were piecing them together from fragments of memory. "Betrayed," she whispered. "Left, for the sun to take." The words hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Elias leaned closer, trying to decipher the pain and bitterness etched into her voice. "Who betrayed you?" Her head turned slightly, her glowing markings dimming. "My kind," she said finally. "They called it justice." Elias sat back on his heels, struggling to digest her cryptic confession. 100 questions fought for dominance in his mind, but the look on her face, haunted, defiant, and fragile all at once, stilled him. This was not the moment to press. Instead, he shifted to a practical matter. "You're dehydrated and weak. Let me help." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening her features. "Why?" Elias hesitated, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "Because you need it," he said finally. "Because I couldn't just leave you there to die." Her gaze softened, though her mistrust lingered. "Your kind takes, destroys. I've seen it." "We're not all the same," Elias countered, the edge in his voice surprising even himself. "You don't know me." The alien girl studied him in silence, the glow of her patterns flickering like a dying ember. Finally, she relented, her body sinking back against the cot. Do what you must. Elias spent the day tending to her wounds and rationing his supplies to ensure her recovery. The effort was meticulous and exhausting, each small task fraught with tension. She remained watchful, her eyes tracking his every movement, as though she expected betrayal at any moment. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the camp, she seemed stronger. Her voice, though still weak, carried a growing confidence. She even attempted to sit upright, though Elias cautioned her against overexertion. "Your name," she said abruptly, breaking the quiet. He paused mid-motion, surprised by the directness of her question. "Elias," he replied. "Dr. Elias Carter." "Elias," she repeated, the syllables foreign on her tongue. "I am Xylara." The name resonated in the stillness, its alien cadence somehow fitting the enigmatic being before him. "Xylara," he echoed, testing its weight. "It's good to meet you, I suppose." Her lips twitched, a gesture that might have been amusement or simply fatigue. "You are strange." "Strange enough to save your life, apparently." The faintest hint of a smile ghosted across her face, but it faded as quickly as it came. Her expression darkened, her gaze distant. "You should not have." Elias frowned. "Why? Because it might get me in trouble?" "Because they will come," she said quietly, her voice heavy with certainty. "They will not let me go." The hairs on the back of Elias's neck prickled. He didn't need to ask who they were. The fear in her voice said enough. "Why are they after you, Xylara?" Her glow flared briefly, a surge of emotion sparking through her markings. "I refuse to follow their laws, refuse to kill for them." Elias stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "That's why they left you in the desert? For refusing to kill?" She nodded, her eyes closing briefly as if to block out the memory. "It is the way of my people. To defy it is to die." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Elias's mind raced, grappling with the implications of her story. This wasn't just an alien lost in the wrong place. This was someone hunted, condemned, and abandoned by her own kind. And now, by saving her, he had made himself a target. "You should leave me," Xylara said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "If they find you, they will kill you too." Elias met her gaze, his expression hardening. I'm not leaving you. Not now." Xylara's eyes widened slightly, her mistrust wavering. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. Outside, the winds shifted, carrying with them a faint, distant sound, a low, mechanical hum that sent a chill through Elias's spine. He rose, stepping outside the tent to scan the horizon. The desert was bathed in twilight, the dunes casting long, jagged shadows. But in the far distance, something moved. A faint, flickering light danced on the edge of visibility, growing steadily brighter. Elias's stomach tightened. "They're coming," Xylara said from behind him, her voice devoid of fear but heavy with resignation. The low hum of distant engines rolled across the desert like an approaching storm, faint but unyielding. Elias stood at the edge of his camp, his pulse quickening as the flickering lights on the horizon grew sharper, more defined. They weren't random. They moved in deliberate, synchronized patterns, their movements too precise to be natural. He turned back to the tent, his mind racing. "Xylara," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We have company." She was already sitting upright, her glow brightening as if in response to the impending danger. Her features sharpened with grim determination, and for the first time since he'd found her, Elias glimpsed a warrior's resolve in her expression. "They've come for me," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias grabbed his pack, hastily shoving essential supplies into it. "We need to move. Now." Xylara hesitated, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "You should leave me," she said quietly. "Run while you can. If they find you with me, you'll share my fate." Elias froze, meeting her eyes. "I told you before, I'm not leaving you. So, unless you have a better plan, I suggest we figure this out together." For a moment, Silara looked as though she might argue, but then she nodded. "There's a ravine to the west," she said. "It will hide us, if we can reach it." Elias nodded, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "Let's go." The desert transformed as they moved, the stillness of the night giving way to the urgency of their flight. The sand shifted treacherously beneath their feet, and the cold bite of the night air seemed to grow sharper with each step. Elias stole glances behind them, his heart sinking as the lights in the distance grew brighter, closer. Whoever was pursuing them wasn't just searching, they were hunting, and they were gaining ground. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice strained. Zylara's glow dimmed, her pace faltering for a moment. "Enforcers," she said. "They serve the council. They exist to maintain order, by any means. And they're after you because you broke their rules?" She nodded, her expression tight. "I refuse to take a life. To them, that is the ultimate betrayal." Elias clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath his fear. "That doesn't sound like justice." "To them it is," she said, her voice heavy with bitterness. They crested a dune, and the ravine Zylara had spoken of came into view, a jagged scar in the earth, its edges crumbling into steep cliffs. The sight brought a flicker of hope to Elias's chest, though it was short-lived. Behind them, the hum of engines grew louder, and he could see the faint silhouettes of their pursuers, sleek, hovering crafts that moved with predatory grace. "We'll have to climb down," Zylara said, already moving toward the edge. Elias followed, but as they approached the ravine, a deafening roar split the air. A burst of light erupted from one of the crafts, striking the sand a few meters away and sending up a plume of debris. "They're firing at us?" Elias shouted, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They don't miss twice," Zylara said, urgency lacing her tone. Without hesitation, she grabbed a length of rope from Elias's pack and began securing it to a nearby rock. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Elias couldn't help but wonder how many times she had done this before. "Go," she said, tossing the rope over the edge. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go." Elias hesitated for only a moment before gripping the rope and beginning his descent. The cliff face was unstable, crumbling under his weight, but he pressed on, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Above him, Zylara followed, her movement swift and sure despite her weakened state. Another blast shook the ravine, the sound reverberating through the stone. Elias glanced up to see a portion of the cliff edge give way, sending a cascade of rocks tumbling down. "Zylara!" he shouted, his voice raw with fear. "I'm fine," she called back, though her glow flickered weakly. They reached the bottom just as another explosion struck, this one sending a shockwave through the ground. The cliff above them collapsed entirely, sealing off their descent and cutting off the immediate pursuit. Elias doubled over, his hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. That was too close. Zylara leaned against the ravine wall, her glow dim but steady. "They won't stop," she said. "Not until they have me." Elias straightened, his gaze hardening. "Then we'll make sure they don't." The ravine was a labyrinth of jagged rock and narrow passages, its shadowy depths offering a semblance of safety. Zylara led the way, her movements cautious but deliberate, as though she could sense the safest path. Elias followed, his mind racing. The enforcers' precision and ruthlessness were unlike anything he had encountered before. This wasn't a simple retrieval mission, it was an execution. "Why did you refuse?" he asked suddenly, his voice echoing softly off the canyon walls. Zylara slowed, her shoulders tensing. "The ritual," she said, "it demands a sacrifice, an innocent life, taken to prove loyalty to the council. I couldn't do it." Elias's stomach turned. "And for that, they left you to die?" "To them, mercy is weakness," she said bitterly. They see my defiance as a disease, something that must be eradicated before it spreads. The weight of her words settled heavily on Elias's chest. He had always believed in the pursuit of knowledge, in understanding the unknown. But this was something else. "They're wrong," he said firmly. Zilara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And yet here we are, running for our lives." Ahead, the ravine opened into a wide chamber, its walls etched with strange ancient carvings that glowed faintly in the darkness. Zilara paused, her gaze sweeping over the symbols with a mixture of awe and caution. "What is this place?" Elias asked, his voice hushed. "A sanctuary," Zilara said, though her tone was uncertain. "Or it was once." The carvings pulsed faintly as they stepped into the chamber, the light responding to their presence. Zilara reached out, her fingers brushing against the stone. The glow intensified, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow across the walls. Elias watched, a sense of unease creeping over him. "What's happening?" Zilara didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the carvings, her expression a mixture of fear and recognition. "They found us," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias turned, his heart sinking, as the hum of engines echoed once more through the ravine. The faint hum of engines reverberated through the ravine, growing louder as Elias and Zilara pressed deeper into the ancient chamber. The glowing carvings on the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, responding to their presence. Elias could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the air thick with a quiet, electric tension that made every breath feel heavier than the last. Zilara moved toward the center of the chamber, her gaze locked on a circular emblem embedded in the floor. It pulsed brighter than the other symbols, its intricate patterns twisting and shifting as though alive. "What is this place?" Elias asked, his voice low but insistent. "It's older than my people," Zilara said, her words almost reverent. "A remnant of those who came before us." Elias furrowed his brow. "Before your people? You mean another species?" Zilara nodded. "They were creators, builders of worlds. We call them the architects. Their ruins are sacred, but also forbidden." She hesitated, her markings dimming slightly. "To enter a place like this is to defy the council even further." "Well," Elias said dryly, glancing toward the faint echoes of pursuit behind them, "I think we're well past worrying about that." Zilara's lips twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. Then her attention returned to the emblem. She knelt beside it, her fingers hovering just above the surface. The carvings flared in response, bathing the chamber in an eerie shifting light. "This is a gate," she murmured. "A gate?" Elias repeated, stepping closer. "To another place," Zilara explained. "A sanctuary, perhaps? Or a trap." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We don't know much about the architects, only that their creations are both wondrous and dangerous." Elias's scientific curiosity surged, momentarily overriding his fear. "If this is a gate, can you activate it?" Zilara glanced at him, her expression wary. "If I do, we won't know what waits on the other side. It could save us, or destroy us." Elias crouched beside her, his gaze steady. "If we stay here, we know exactly what will happen. They'll find us and they'll kill you. Probably me too." He gestured toward the glowing emblem. "This might be our only chance." Zilara's bioluminescent patterns flickered uncertainly, but she nodded. "If we do this," she said, her voice firm, "there's no turning back." "I'm with you," Elias said simply. The sound of the engines grew louder, reverberating through the narrow canyon like a death knell. Zilara pressed her hand to the center of the emblem, her markings flaring brightly as she made contact. The carvings on the walls responded instantly, their light intensifying until the chamber was awash in a dazzling otherworldly glow. The ground beneath them trembled, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. The emblem began to shift, its intricate patterns reconfiguring into a complex array of symbols that seemed to defy comprehension. Elias stepped back instinctively, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What's happening?" "The gate is opening," Zylara said, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty. As the tremors grew stronger, a swirling vortex of light began to form above the emblem. It twisted and coiled like a living thing, its colors shifting through shades Elias couldn't name. The air grew thick with energy, each breath tingling against his skin. Suddenly, the hum of engines was replaced by the sharp mechanical whine of the Enforcer's crafts. They had arrived. The first craft descended into the ravine, its sleek metallic frame catching the glow of the carvings. Elias could see the figures inside, tall, imposing beings with angular features and eyes that burned with an unnatural light. Their movements were deliberate, their weapons trained on the chamber entrance. "Zylara," Elias said, his voice urgent. She didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the gate, her markings now blazing with intensity. The vortex above the emblem began to stabilize, its chaotic swirls coalescing into a singular, pulsating portal. The Enforcers moved with terrifying precision, their boots crunching against the stone as they advanced. One of them, a figure taller than the rest, with markings that glowed a deep, menacing red, stepped forward. "Zylara," the figure said, his voice resonant and cold, "you have nowhere left to run." Zylara stiffened at the sound of his voice, her glow faltering for a moment. "Sarvik," she said, her tone heavy with bitterness. Elias's stomach twisted. This was the leader of the Enforcers, the one who had hunted her across the desert. "You defied the Council," Sarvik continued, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "You abandoned your duty. Now you will face the consequences." Zylara rose slowly, her movements deliberate. "You call it duty," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I call it murder." Sarvik's expression didn't change. "Your defiance threatens the balance. It cannot be allowed to spread." "And what about the balance of those you destroy?" Zylara shot back. "What about the lives you take in the name of your laws?" Sarvik's gaze flickered to the portal behind her, his eyes narrowing. "You've tampered with forces beyond your understanding," he said. "The Architect's relics are not to be trifled with." Elias stepped forward, his heart pounding. If they're so dangerous, then why did they leave them behind? Maybe they wanted someone to use them. Sarvik's gaze shifted to Elias, and the weight of his attention was almost unbearable. "A human," he said with disdain. "You have no place in this." "Funny," Elias said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Neither do you." Zylara's glow flared suddenly, and the portal behind her pulsed with energy. "Enough," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "You speak of balance, Sarvik, but your actions have only brought destruction." Sarvik raised his weapon, the glow of its barrel charging with lethal energy. "You leave me no choice." Before he could fire, Zylara reached out, her markings blazing brighter than ever. The portal erupted in a surge of light, and the chamber was consumed by a blinding radiance. Elias felt the ground shift beneath him, the air tearing with a sound like thunder. For a moment he was weightless, caught in the overwhelming pull of the portal. Then everything went dark. When the light faded, Elias found himself lying on cool, smooth stone. The air was different here, clean, crisp, and humming with a quiet energy. He sat up slowly, his head spinning, and took in his surroundings. They were in a vast open chamber, its walls lined with more of the glowing carvings. The portal swirled behind them, its light softer now, almost gentle. Zylara stood nearby, her expression a mixture of relief and awe. "Where are we?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. Zylara's gaze swept over the chamber, her markings dimming slightly as she exhaled. "A sanctuary," she said, "but not one I've ever seen before." Elias's chest tightened. The chase wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The air within the sanctuary thrummed with a quiet energy, the kind that whispered of ancient secrets and unimaginable power. Elias stood beside Zylara, the glow of the swirling portal casting soft, shifting light across their faces. The chamber stretched endlessly above them, the glowing carvings on the walls forming constellations of alien design. The faint hum of the portal behind them was the only sound, an otherworldly melody that seemed to synchronize with the beats of their hearts. But this was no reprieve. The moment of stillness carried the weight of inevitability. Zylara turned to him, her silvered skin luminous under the chamber's strange light. "They will follow," she said softly. Her voice carried no panic, only a resigned certainty. Elias met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll face them here." The sanctuary was more than a refuge. It was a place of answers. As Zylara moved through its halls, her bioluminescent markings flickering with purpose, Elias noticed how the carvings seemed to respond to her presence. The glowing symbols shifted subtly, aligning themselves into patterns that were at once beautiful and incomprehensible. "Do you recognize these?" Elias asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Zylara paused, her fingers brushing lightly over the carvings. "Not entirely," she admitted, "but they feel familiar, as though they were made for us to find." Elias frowned, stepping closer. "You think the architects left this place for your people? Or for anyone willing to seek it?" Zylara said. "Perhaps they knew that one day we would need it." The thought hung heavy between them. Elias's gaze lingered on the carvings, his scientific mind racing. He had spent his career unraveling the mysteries of Earth, but this was something entirely different, something far greater than himself. "Zylara," he said slowly, "what if this place holds the power to stop them?" She turned to him, her expression sharp with understanding. "You think the architects left a weapon?" "Or a tool," Elias said. "Something to protect those who stand against injustice. Maybe that's why the enforcers fear these places. They know they can't control them." Zylara hesitated, her glow dimming as doubt crept into her eyes. "If you're wrong, activating whatever is here could destroy us all." Elias nodded. "It could, but if we do nothing, they'll keep hunting you, and others like you. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" For a long moment, Zylara said nothing. Then her glow flared, bright and resolute. "Let's find out." The portal flared suddenly, its light shifting from soft blues and greens to harsh, warning reds. Elias and Zylara turned as the sanctuary trembled, the air growing thick with tension. "They're coming," Zylara said, her voice tight. The enforcers emerged from the portal like shadows given form, their figures stark and menacing against the light. At their head was Sarvik, his red markings blazing like fire. He stepped forward, his weapon drawn, his gaze fixed on Zylara. "You've run far enough," he said, his voice echoing with cold finality. Elias moved to stand beside Zylara, his heart pounding. "You don't have to do this," he said, addressing Sarvik directly. "You're afraid of this place because you don't understand it, but maybe it's not meant to be feared. Maybe it's meant to change things." Sarvik's expression didn't waver. "The only change we seek is order," he said, "and order demands that she be silenced." Zylara stepped forward, her markings blazing with defiance. "Your order is built on lies," she said, "on fear. You claim to protect our people, but you destroy anyone who dares to question you." Sarvik raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the carvings on the walls began to pulse. The light intensified, and the chamber trembled violently. "What's happening?" Elias shouted over the rising hum. Zylara's eyes widened. "The architects are listening." The sanctuary came alive, its walls shifting and reshaping as though responding to an unspoken command. The enforcers faltered, their disciplined formation breaking as the chamber's power surged. A beam of light descended from the ceiling, striking the center of the floor where the portal swirled. The light coalesced into a shape, a figure tall and ethereal, its form composed entirely of shifting, luminous patterns. Elias stared in awe. "Is that One of them? Zylara nodded, her voice hushed. An architect. The figure spoke, its voice resonating in a language Elias couldn't understand, yet its meaning was clear. It addressed Zylara first, its light shifting to match her markings. You have defied the path set before you, the figure said, its tone neither approving nor condemning. Why? Zylara stepped forward, her glow steady. Because the path is wrong, because it demands we sacrifice what makes us whole. The figure turned its gaze to Sarvik, who stood frozen in place. And you, it said, you enforce this path without question. Why? Sarvik hesitated, his markings flickering. It is the way of our people, he said finally. It is our law. The figure's light shifted, its patterns growing more complex. The law is a tool, not a truth, it said. A tool must serve those who wield it, not destroy them. Elias found his voice. Can you help us? He asked, his words tumbling out. Can you stop them from hunting her? The figure turned to him, its light dimming slightly. The choice is yours, it said. The architects left this place not to rule, but to guide. If you seek to change the path, you must take it into your own hands. The figure dissolved into light, and the carvings around the chamber began to pulse in unison. Zylara looked to Elias, her expression fierce. What do we do? She asked. Elias glanced at Sarvik, who stood rooted in place, his followers uncertain and faltering. The enforcers were no longer invincible. They were afraid. We show them another way, Elias said. Zylara moved to the central emblem, her hands glowing as she pressed them against the surface. The chamber responded, its light intensifying as the energy surged. The enforcers dropped their weapons, their faces etched with fear and awe. When the light faded, the portal was gone, and the sanctuary fell silent. In the aftermath, Zylara and Elias stood together at the edge of the ravine, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. They'll think twice before hunting anyone again, Zylara said. Elias nodded. And maybe your people will start to question the path they've been following. Zylara turned to him, her glow soft and warm. You could have left me, she said, but you didn't. Elias smiled faintly. Some paths are worth fighting for. As the sun rose, casting golden light over the endless dunes, they walked together into the desert, their journey far from over, but their path, for now, was their own. The twin moons of Dekron's Reach hung heavy in the night sky, their pale light filtering through the thick haze of industrial fumes. Beneath them sprawled the colony, a chaotic assembly of prefabricated buildings and makeshift shanties. The settlement clung stubbornly to the edge of a vast, alien wilderness, its inhabitants too desperate or too stubborn to acknowledge the danger that pressed in from all sides. Ethan Rains walked the cracked streets of the colony's underbelly, the mechanical hum of his prosthetic leg blending with the distant clang of heavy machinery. His jacket hung loose over his shoulders, stained with oil and dust from the day's labor. His right hand, scarred and calloused, rested on the multi-tool holstered at his hip, a habit formed from years of necessity rather than paranoia. The square ahead glowed faintly, an unnatural light pooling in the misty air. Ethan didn't need to see the source to know what it was. He'd heard the whispers, the rumors passed between workers over cheap liquor and stale rations, the alien in the cage. He rounded the corner, and there it was. A towering enclosure of reinforced alloy loomed in the center of the square, casting jagged shadows under the colony's dim floodlights. Inside, motionless yet unmistakably alive, stood the creature. A woman, if one could call her that, though she bore little resemblance to any human Ethan had ever encountered. Her skin shimmered faintly with shifting hues of blue and green, like bioluminescent algae on a dark ocean. Her hair, long and braided, glinted like spun silver. Chains bound her wrists and ankles, forcing her into a posture of weary submission. Ethan stopped at the edge of the square, his gaze drawn to her despite himself. The air seemed heavier here, charged with a strange energy. She's a beaut, isn't she?" Ethan turned to find a man leaning casually against a stack of crates. His grin was as oily as the stains on his jumpsuit, his eyes sharp with greed. "They say she's worth more than this whole stinking colony. Morvek brought her in himself, claimed her as his prize." Ethan said nothing, his eyes returning to the cage. The woman's gaze was fixed on the ground, her expression unreadable. Yet there was something about her stillness, a tension, a quiet defiance, that made his chest tighten. "Don't get any ideas," the man continued, his tone shifting to a warning. "That thing's dangerous. Killed 3 men before they got her locked up. Morvek's keeping her as a trophy, but she's more trouble than she's worth if you ask me." "Then why keep her?" Ethan asked, his voice low. The man shrugged. "Politics, maybe. Or pride. Who knows with Morvek?" He spat on the ground and pushed off the crates. "Anyway, you'd best keep your distance. You're new here, right? Trust me, nothing good comes from sticking your nose in Morvek's business." Ethan watched the man disappear into the shadows, his words echoing in the silence that followed. He turned back to the cage. For a moment, he considered walking away, letting the mystery remain just that. But something kept him rooted in place. The woman shifted slightly, her luminous skin catching the light. Her eyes, sharp and startlingly intelligent, flicked upward and met his. Ethan froze. Her gaze was piercing, unyielding, a challenge and a plea all at once. It lasted only a second before she lowered her head again, but it was enough to send a ripple of unease through him. Ethan turned abruptly and walked away, his thoughts churning. He told himself he didn't care, that it wasn't his problem. The colony was full of injustices, and he'd learned long ago that fighting against them was a fool's game. Yet her eyes haunted him as he made his way back to his workshop, the echo of that silent plea refusing to be ignored. The workshop was a cluttered, dimly lit space, filled with the acrid smell of oil and burning metal. Ethan paced restlessly, his mind racing. He thought of the chains, the crude way she'd been put on display, the casual cruelty in the man's voice as he'd called her a thing. He sat down heavily at his workbench, running a hand through his unkempt hair. The multi-tool glinted in the low light, its edges worn smooth from years of use. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "Why do you care?" he thought bitterly. He didn't even know her name, let alone her story. For all he knew, she really was as dangerous as they claimed. But then he remembered her eyes, the spark of intelligence and dignity that refused to be extinguished despite everything. Ethan set the tool down with a sharp exhale. His gaze drifted to the schematics pinned to the wall, diagrams of security systems he'd helped repair, the blueprints of the colony etched into his memory. The decision settled over him slowly, like the tightening of a vice. If he didn't act, no one would. The square was deserted when Ethan returned, the floodlights casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. He moved quickly, his steps silent, his heart pounding against his ribs. The cage loomed ahead, a hulking shadow in the mist. Ethan approached cautiously, his fingers brushing the multi-tool at his hip. He scanned the area for guards but found none. Morvek's arrogance, it seemed, was his ally tonight. He knelt by the cage's control panel, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The mechanisms were familiar, primitive even. It took him less than a minute to disable the locks. The door creaked open, and for a moment, Ethan hesitated. The woman inside didn't move, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Up close, she was even more striking, her bioluminescence casting faint patterns on the metal walls. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. She didn't respond, but her eyes narrowed slightly as if weighing his words. Ethan extended a hand, the gesture as much an offering as a risk. "Come on, we don't have much time." For a moment, she remained still. Then, slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. Her touch was cool, her grip firm. Together, they stepped out of the cage and into the unknown. The jungle beyond the colony's perimeter swallowed them whole. Dense, twisted vegetation stretched upward in grotesque shapes, their alien forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. A heavy mist clung to the ground, curling around their ankles like a living thing. Every sound, the crackle of leaves, the distant cries of unseen creatures, seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. Ethan's grip tightened on the crude map he had snagged from the workshop before their escape. Its markings were vague at best, offering little more than a promise of direction. He glanced over his shoulder at the woman, Vorina as she had murmured during their frantic flight from the square. Her name was as strange and compelling as she was. She moved silently, her bioluminescent skin dimmed to a muted glow, as though she were willing herself invisible. Her posture was wary, but regal, her eyes constantly scanning the shadows. Ethan stopped beside a massive tree, its bark pulsing faintly with an inner light, and motioned for her to do the same. "We need to rest," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the jungle. Vorina hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the way they had come. Then, with a slow nod, she crouched beside him, her movements as fluid as water. Ethan leaned back against the tree, his breath coming in uneven bursts. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was fading, leaving behind a gnawing exhaustion. He risked a glance at her. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable. "Do you understand me?" he asked, keeping his tone low. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Your language. Crude," she replied, her voice low and melodic, each word carefully shaped. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the richness of her voice. "But you can speak it." She inclined her head, her gaze sharpening. "Enough." Ethan let out a slow breath. "Good. That's good." He hesitated, unsure how to bridge the gulf between them. "I'm Ethan. You already told me your name, Vorina. Right?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "Why help me, Ethan Rains?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because someone had to," he muttered finally. Vorina tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing. "And now? What do you intend?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stared out into the jungle where faint streaks of moonlight pierced the canopy. The truth was, he hadn't thought that far ahead. He had acted on impulse, driven by a gnawing sense of wrongness that he couldn't ignore. Now, with the full weight of what he had done settling over him, he felt the edges of doubt creeping in. "Getting you out of here," he said at last, though the conviction in his voice didn't entirely convince even himself. Vorina's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, before she shifted her attention to the jungle. "Morvek will not let you escape so easily." The mention of the captain's name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He hadn't seen Morvek since the night he'd arrived on Dacron's Reach, but the man's reputation preceded him. Cold, methodical, and utterly without mercy, Morvek ruled the colony like a personal fiefdom. The thought of him hunting them through the wilderness was almost enough to make Ethan reconsider his decision. Almost. "Let him come," Ethan said, though his voice was tighter than he intended. "We'll be long gone by the time he catches up." Vorina's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it carried no warmth. "You do not know him as I do." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but a faint rustling sound cut him off. He froze, his hand instinctively moving to the multi-tool at his belt. Vorina's posture tensed, her eyes locking onto the shadows ahead. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic, deliberate crunching of leaves and undergrowth. Footsteps. Ethan motioned for Vorina to stay low as he crouched behind the tree. He could feel his pulse hammering in his ears as the footsteps drew closer. Two figures emerged from the gloom, their silhouettes stark against the faint glow of the jungle. Colony guards. Their uniforms were dark, their weapons slung low but ready. They moved cautiously, their gazes sweeping the area. Ethan's breath caught as one of them turned, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. It stopped inches from where Ethan and Vorina crouched, the harsh light illuminating the faint shimmer of her skin. The guard stiffened. "There! I saw something!" Before Ethan could react, Verena moved. She sprang from the shadows with a fluidity that defied belief, her chains flashing like silver streaks in the moonlight. The first guard didn't even have time to cry out before she struck, her movements a blur of precision and power. His weapon clattered to the ground as he crumpled, unconscious. The second guard managed to raise his rifle, but Ethan was already moving. He lunged forward, his multi-tool flashing as he struck the weapon's barrel, sending the shot wide. The guard staggered back, and Ethan followed up with a sharp blow to his temple. The man collapsed, and the jungle fell silent once more. Ethan stood over the unconscious guards, his chest heaving. His hands trembled as he turned to Verena. That was necessary, she said calmly, her gaze cool and unflinching. Ethan stared at her, a mixture of awe and unease churning in his gut. She had taken down the guards with an efficiency that bordered on terrifying. This wasn't just strength or instinct, it was training, honed and deliberate. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Verena met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "A prisoner. Nothing more." Ethan didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. He crouched beside the guards, checking their pulses. Both were alive, though they wouldn't be waking up any time soon. "We need to move," he said, his voice steadier now. "They'll send more when these two don't report back." Verena nodded, her chains clinking softly as she stepped back into the shadows. Ethan followed her, his thoughts a storm of questions. Who was she really? What had she done to end up here? And most troubling of all, what had he just gotten himself into? As they disappeared into the jungle, the distant wail of a siren pierced the air, a chilling reminder that their escape was far from over. The jungle seemed endless, a labyrinth of alien flora and bioluminescent shadows that whispered secrets to anyone brave or foolish enough to venture within. The mist had thickened as the night deepened, clinging to Ethan and Verena like a shroud. Each step felt heavier, more fraught, as if the wilderness itself conspired against them. Ethan could feel exhaustion settling into his bones. His legs ached, his prosthetic knee clicking faintly with every step. Yet Verena moved with an almost otherworldly grace, her glowing skin casting faint light on the path ahead. She hadn't spoken since their confrontation with the guards, and the silence between them had grown taut, like a wire stretched too thin. "Wait," Ethan whispered, raising a hand. He stopped beside a tree, whose bark pulsed faintly with a rhythmic glow, as though it had its own heartbeat. He crouched, motioning for Verena to do the same. "We've been walking for hours. We need a plan." Verena hesitated, then knelt beside him. "Planning implies options," she said, her voice low but cutting. "We have few." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "We can't just keep running blindly. Morvek won't stop, not until he's caught us. We need to figure out where we're going, what we're doing." Verena's luminous eyes narrowed. "There is no safety in this jungle. You know that as well as I." Her words sent a chill through him. She was right. This place was hostile to anything not adapted to its strange ecosystem. The stories he'd heard from other colonists about creatures lurking in the shadows were enough to keep anyone from venturing far. But before Ethan could respond, the faint hum of machinery drifted through the trees. Verena stiffened, her head tilting slightly, as if to catch the sound more clearly. Ethan's stomach tightened as he recognized the low whine of a scout drone. "They're close," he said, his voice barely audible. Verena nodded, her gaze scanning the canopy. Without a word, she grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him into the thick undergrowth. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her touch sending a jolt of discomfort, and something else through him. They crouched in silence as the sound grew louder, the drone's mechanical whirring cutting through the jungle's natural symphony. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as he spotted the faint glimmer of its searchlight sweeping the trees. Verena's gaze sharpened, and she leaned close to whisper in his ear. Do not move. Ethan barely had time to register her words before she shifted, her glowing skin dimming until it seemed she melted into the shadows. He stared, his breath caught in his throat. The drone's light swept over their hiding spot, pausing for a heart-stopping moment. Ethan felt sweat bead on his forehead as he resisted the urge to move, to breathe. And then it passed, the hum of its engine receding into the distance. Ethan exhaled shakily, glancing at Verena. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. That was close, he muttered, his voice shaking slightly. Verena tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. You are not suited to this. Gee, thanks, Ethan said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. Not all of us are superhuman warriors. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something, amusement, annoyance, crossing her face. But before she could respond, a faint sound interrupted them. It was soft at first, barely distinguishable from the jungle's natural noises. But it grew steadily louder, a deep resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Ethan's chest. What is that? He whispered, his voice tight. Verena's gaze darkened. Trouble. The ground beneath them began to tremble faintly, and the air grew heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. Ethan felt his breath catch as the foliage ahead began to sway violently, as though something massive was pushing through it. And then it emerged. The creature was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Towering over the trees, its body was a shifting amalgamation of glistening black scales and pulsing bioluminescent patterns. Multiple limbs ended in wickedly sharp claws, and its head, elongated and featureless, swayed as though sniffing the air. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. What the hell is that? He hissed, his voice barely audible. Death, Verena replied, her tone grim. The creature's head snapped toward them, and Ethan felt the full weight of its gaze, or whatever passed for it. Move! Verena barked, shoving him to his feet. They bolted as the creature let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating through the jungle like a shockwave. Ethan stumbled over roots and vines, his prosthetic leg protesting with every step. Verena moved ahead of him, her agility almost supernatural as she dodged the jungle's obstacles. The creature crashed through the foliage behind them, its massive limbs tearing through trees as if they were paper. This way, Verena called, veering sharply to the left. Ethan followed, his lungs burning. The jungle opened up slightly, revealing a narrow ravine cutting through the terrain. Verena didn't hesitate, leaping across the gap with a grace that left Ethan stunned. He skidded to a halt at the edge, staring down into the abyss. The drop was dizzying, the bottom shrouded in mist. Jump! Verena shouted from the other side, her voice sharp with urgency. Ethan hesitated, his legs trembling. The creature was closing in, its roars shaking the ground beneath him. With a surge of desperation, he leaped. For a moment he was weightless, the air rushing past him as he reached for the opposite ledge. Verena's hand shot out, gripping his arm with a strength that sent pain lancing through his shoulder. She hauled him up with a grunt, her expression tight. The creature roared again, but its pursuit faltered as it reached the edge of the ravine. It let out a frustrated cry, pacing back and forth before retreating into the jungle. Ethan collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. His chest heaved as he stared up at the alien sky, the twin moons casting a faint glow over the treetops. Verena stood over him, her expression unreadable. You hesitate too much, she said finally. Ethan let out a weak laugh, his breath still shaky. I'll work on that. But as he lay there, the reality of their situation settled over him like a weight. They had escaped the creature, but the jungle held more dangers than he could fathom, and Morvek was still out there hunting them. He glanced up at Verena, who stood silhouetted against the moons. What's out there? He asked, his voice soft. What's waiting for us? Her gaze flicked to the horizon, her expression distant. Answers, she said quietly. And more questions. The alien jungle's oppressive vastness gave way to an eerie quiet as Ethan and Verena pressed onward. The distant sounds of pursuit, drones and guards tearing through the wilderness, had grown faint, but Ethan knew better than to believe they were safe. Every step deeper into the jungle was another gamble, another roll of the dice. The faint bioluminescence of the foliage painted the world around them in hues of green and blue, an otherworldly twilight that seemed to blur the line between dream and reality. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and an unidentifiable tang, sharp and metallic. Ethan's senses were on edge, every sound and flicker of movement igniting fresh waves of anxiety. But Verena was calm, too calm. Her glowing skin had returned to its faint, muted shimmer, casting a faint halo around her as she moved. Her stride was deliberate, her gaze fixed ahead as though she knew where she was going, though she had never spoken of a destination. "Verena," Ethan said at last, his voice breaking the silence between them. "We can't keep walking blind like this. We need to stop, figure things out." She didn't look at him, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, a shadow of hesitation. "Stopping is a luxury we cannot afford," she replied, her voice as steady as her steps. "Yeah, and neither is collapsing," Ethan shot back, frustration seeping into his tone. He was exhausted, his prosthetic leg ached, his lungs burned, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Verena slowed, her gaze sweeping the jungle ahead. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she nodded. "There," she said, motioning toward a faintly glowing outcropping of rock that jutted from the ground like a crooked tooth. "We will rest briefly." Ethan didn't wait for further permission. He stumbled to the rock and sank down, letting his back rest against its cool surface. His chest heaved as he pulled a flask from his pack and took a swig of water, the liquid doing little to soothe the rawness in his throat. Verena remained standing, her posture rigid as she scanned their surroundings. "Do you ever stop moving?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with exasperation. She glanced at him, her luminous eyes catching the faint light of the jungle. "The hunted cannot afford complacency." Ethan frowned, lowering the flask. "You talk like you've been running your whole life." Her gaze darkened, and for a moment, Ethan thought she wouldn't answer. But then she turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "I was a leader," she said finally, her voice low and measured. "On my world, I commanded armies, protected my people. We were warriors, yes, but we had honor, purpose, until the outsiders came." Ethan sat up straighter, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Outsiders." Her jaw tightened. "Humans, like you." The words hit Ethan like a blow, though he couldn't say why. "They came with promises of trade and alliance," Verena continued, her tone hardening. "But they brought deceit. They exploited divisions among us, turned my people against one another. I was betrayed, sold to the highest bidder. That is how I came to be here, your colony, your prison." Ethan's mind reeled as he tried to process her words. He had known on some level that humanity's expansion across the stars had left a trail of exploitation and destruction. But hearing it from Verena, seeing the scars of that reality etched into her very being, was something else entirely. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Verena's eyes flashed. "And what would you have done if you had? Turned away, as you did every other time you saw injustice? Or would you have acted as you did for me?" Ethan flinched at the accusation in her tone, though he couldn't argue with it. He had spent most of his life drifting from one colony to the next, keeping his head down, avoiding entanglements. Helping Verena had been a rare exception, a moment of impulse he still didn't fully understand. "I'm trying to make it right," he said, his voice firmer now. Her gaze softened, if only slightly. "Then perhaps there is hope for you yet." Before Ethan could respond, a faint hum reached his ears, a sound he recognized all too well. "Drones," he muttered, scrambling to his feet. Verena's posture tensed, and she motioned for him to follow her. They slipped into the undergrowth, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. The sound grew louder, joined by the faint crackle of voices over a comm system. The colony's hunters were closing in, but then something changed. The air around them seemed to ripple, a faint distortion that made Ethan's vision blur. "What the?" he began, but Vorina grabbed his arm, silencing him. "Stay close," she said, her voice unusually sharp. They stepped forward, and the jungle around them seemed to shift. The trees grew taller, their bioluminescent patterns brighter and more intricate. The ground beneath their feet felt softer, almost spongy. And in the distance, Ethan could see a faint pulsing light, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. "What is this?" he whispered. Vorina didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the light, her expression unreadable. "This," she said finally, "is why I came to this place." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing with questions, but before he could voice them, the light grew brighter, enveloping them both. And then the world changed. They stood in a vast open space, unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The ground was a shimmering expanse of silver and blue, and the air buzzed with an energy that made his skin tingle. Floating structures, organic yet mechanical, hovered in the distance, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of light. This isn't the jungle," Ethan said, his voice trembling. Vorina stepped forward, her gaze scanning the alien landscape. "No," she said quietly. "This is a sanctuary, a remnant of my people's past, a place of power and memory." Ethan followed her, his awe tempered by unease. "How did you know about this?" Vorina hesitated, her expression shadowed. "Because it called to me," she said finally. "In my captivity, I felt its pull, a fragment of what was lost. It is why I had to escape, why I needed to survive." Ethan frowned, his gaze darting to the hovering structures. "And what happens now?" Vorina turned to him, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Now, we fight." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes had just changed, and with them, everything he thought he understood. The sanctuary pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to reach beyond time itself, a steady heartbeat that resonated deep within Ethan's chest. The floating structures, shimmering with an iridescent glow, shifted subtly in the charged air, as though aware of their presence. The alien world around him, impossibly vast and intricate, whispered truths he could not yet understand. Vorina stood at the center of the space, her bioluminescent skin now radiant with an intensity Ethan hadn't seen before. She appeared transformed, taller, stronger, her movements imbued with purpose. It was as if the sanctuary had awakened something within her, something ancient and powerful. "Vorina," Ethan called, his voice uncertain. She turned to face him, her expression a blend of determination and sorrow. "This place holds the essence of my people," she said. "Their knowledge, their strength, their legacy. It is a fragment of what was stolen from us." Ethan took a cautious step closer, his gaze flickering to the hovering lights above. "And now what? Do we just stay here? Hide forever?" Vorina shook her head, her luminous eyes piercing. Number hiding was never the goal. This sanctuary is not a refuge. It is a weapon. Ethan froze, the weight of her words settling over him. A weapon? She extended her hand, and the light around them seemed to coalesce, swirling toward her in ribbons of energy. "My people created places like this to protect themselves during times of great peril. It was meant to shield, to guide, and to retaliate." Ethan felt the air grow heavier, a hum building in his ears. He swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. "So what are you saying? You're going to fight back? Against who? The colony? The whole damn human empire?" Vorina's gaze didn't waver. "Against those who enslave, who exploit, who strip worlds bare in their greed. Your people have taken much, Ethan. This ends now." The finality in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. "And what about the innocent people back there? The ones who had nothing to do with this?" Morvek is one thing, but not everyone's a monster. Vorina hesitated, the light in her eyes dimming slightly. I have seen little innocence in your kind, she said, though her voice lacked the venom it carried before. But you are different. You risked your life to save mine. Perhaps not all are beyond redemption. Ethan took a step forward, his jaw set. Then let me help you, but we have to be smart about this. If you unleash whatever's in this place, it could destroy everything, good and bad alike. For a long moment, Vorina said nothing. The energy around her seemed to shift, growing calmer, more subdued. You are right, she said at last, her voice soft but resolute. Power without purpose is destruction, and vengeance without restraint is hollow. A faint smile tugged at Ethan's lips. Glad we're on the same page. But their moment of quiet understanding was shattered by a sudden, jarring noise, a metallic clatter, followed by the unmistakable whir of drones. They've found us, Ethan muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Vorina's expression hardened. Then we make our stand. From the shadows of the sanctuary's edge, Captain Morvek emerged, flanked by a squad of armed guards and hovering drones. His face twisted into a smug grin as he surveyed the scene. Well, well, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. I had a feeling you'd lead me somewhere interesting, Rains. But this is beyond expectations. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Morvek and Vorina. Turn around, Morvek. You don't know what you're dealing with. Morvek laughed, the sound cold and sharp. Oh, I think I do. You've stumbled upon something valuable, and I intend to claim it, just like I claimed her. Vorina bristled, the light around her flaring dangerously. You will not claim anything, she said, her voice a low growl. Morvek smirked, raising a hand. Kill the man. Subdue the alien. The guards moved as one, their weapons raised, and then the sanctuary responded. The floating structures pulsed with blinding light, and the air itself seemed to come alive. Ethan felt a surge of energy ripple through the ground, and the guards were thrown back as if by an invisible force. Vorina stepped forward, her presence commanding, and raised her hand. The light coalesced into a glowing spear that formed in her grasp. Leave, she commanded, her voice resonating with an otherworldly authority. Or face the wrath of this place. Morvek, undeterred, drew his own weapon and fired. The shot never reached its target. The air shimmered, and the bullet dissolved into nothingness. I warned you, Vorina said. She thrust the spear forward, and a shockwave of energy erupted from its tip. The drones exploded in bursts of light, and the guards scattered, scrambling for cover. Morvek fell to his knees, his smug grin replaced by wide-eyed terror. Wait, he gasped, raising his hands. We can talk. No, Vorina said, her gaze cold. You do not talk. You take. You destroy. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. Vorina, stop. You've won. Don't become like him. For a moment she hesitated. The spear flickered in her hand, its light dimming. You fight for vengeance, Ethan continued, his voice steady. But what happens after? If you destroy him now, what will you have left? Her luminous eyes met his, and the anger in them softened. Slowly, she lowered the spear. You are spared, she said to Morvek, her tone ice. But you will never harm another. Leave, and tell your kind what you saw here. Tell them to fear. Morvek scrambled to his feet and fled, his guards following in disarray. As the sanctuary grew quiet once more, Vorina turned to Ethan. You are wise for one so young, she said. Ethan laughed softly, the sound tinged with relief. I'm not that young. She smiled faintly, the expression rare but genuine. What now? He asked, glancing at the glowing structures around them. Vorina's gaze turned to the horizon. Now we rebuild, we reclaim, and we ensure this does not happen again. Ethan nodded, his own resolve solidifying. Then I'm with you. And as they stood together in the sanctuary's light, the future stretched before them, a path of uncertainty and hope, forged by their shared defiance and the echoes of a world reborn.